back to EDH Deck Building. I am your host, Demo, and these are the 10 best commander cards from Phyrexia. All will be one. Overall, I didn't think this was a phenomenal commander set, and obviously you can tell that from the title of the video, because whenever we have a set that's really, really good for commander, lots of great staples, I usually do a top 20. When I do a top 10, which I haven't been doing much lately, in fact, I haven't done a top 10 from a set in quite some time, that means I had a little bit of a hard time finding cards that I think are going to be really impactful in the format, and that was the case here. I even had a hard time coming up with a top 10 list of cards that I think are going to be essentially commander staples going forward. There was a lot of archetype specific cards in this set. So there are cards that you are going to see, and I will make another video about a lot of those cards that maybe they're going to see some play, or they'll see play in specific archetypes. Obviously, if you are in an infect theme or any sort of proliferate theme, you made out really, really well with this set, because there's an absolute ton of support in those particular themes. In fact, if you have an Atraxa deck that happens to be a proliferate infect deck, you got so much support from this set. I don't know how you're going to fit all those cards in your deck. You probably already don't have a lot of room in your deck for cards, and you have so much to choose from this set. It's going to be tough to do so. I also will point out I am not including commanders on this list, even though there's an absolute ton of commanders on this list that I think are fantastic in the 99. In fact, they'll probably be more popular in the 99 than they will as commanders, because again, they're just very archetype specific and they fit really nicely into a lot of themes that already exist. But getting to my actual list, I'm going to start out with an honorable mention just because I really like cards like this and they always stand out to me. Tyvar's Stand. X in a green instant. Target creature you control gets +X/+X and gains hexproof and indestructible until end of turn. I really like cards like this, cards that protect your stuff. These aren't flashy cards. They don't usually stand out for people. Blacksmith Skill and Tamiyo's Safekeeping are two cards that didn't really get a lot of buzz when they first came out, and I put them in all my decks because I love the idea for 1 mana just being able to protect your stuff. Now, Tyvar's Stand is only going to target creatures, but you don't have to pay the X at all, obviously. If someone's about to remove your commander, you just pay the 1 green, give it hexproof and indestructible, which will protect it from pretty much anything. And then also we got the versatility factor here, where you can use this as well to just give your commander a huge boost if you want to be getting in for commander damage or something like that. I think this is a pretty good card, and it'll probably see some play in the format. Getting to my top 10 from the set though, Mind Splice Apparatus, 3 and a blue artifact, has flash. At the beginning of your upkeep, put an oil counter on Mind Splice Apparatus. Instant and sorcery spells you cast cost 1 less to cast for each oil counter on Mind Splice Apparatus. So the oil counter thing that's a new thing in this set, obviously, and a lot of the oil counter stuff will be interacting with itself, and if you have a way to put more oil counters on this, it's going to be great. However, just on its own, I think it's a pretty good card in a lot of those Is It Spellslinger decks, which of course we have a ton of those in the format. Because it has flash, you can flash it in on your opponent's end step, which is pretty good in a Spellslinger theme, because of course you do a lot of casting of stuff on your opponent's turn already. So you're going to have mana open, you see your opportunity, you flash this in on your opponent's end step, and then immediately at the beginning of your turn, you're going to put an oil counter on it. Now all your instants and sorceries cost 1 less to cast. That's not bad. But then of course it only gets better from there. The next turn, you're going to put another oil counter on it, and your instants and sorceries are going to cost 2 less to cast. So I do think it's a pretty fantastic fit in any of those Spellslinger or instant and sorcery themed decks, and it is definitely going to see some play in the format. Coming in at number 9, Cankerbloom, 1 in a green, Phyrexian Fungus, 3/2. Pay 1 and sacrifice, choose 1. Destroy target artifact or destroy target enchantment or proliferate. I love everything about this card. I love ability stapled on creatures, first of all, because of course, if you're in a sacrifice theme, it works great. Recursion theme, it works great. If you just have the ability to search for creatures in your deck, it's really good, because of course, this allows allows you to search for a removal option in your deck. We do already have a few creatures in the format that have a similar ability of sacrificing it to destroy an artifact or enchantment, which of course you're always going to want to be doing in every commander game, but then they tagged the proliferate on there as well. I love versatile cards that give you lots of options. So even though this card could probably fit in a ton of decks, it is particularly good in any deck where you want to be proliferating, obviously, and it doesn't have to necessarily be proliferate theme. If I'm in just a +1/+1 counter theme, which of course there's a ton of decks out there, whether they be Simic or Selesnya, that are doing those +1/+1 counters, this seems like a fantastic fit. Any artifact or enchantment removal that I already have in the deck, I could just take it out and replace it with this, because I still have the artifact and enchantment removal, but then on top of that, I have that option for proliferating if I really want to. So I think this guy fits in a ton of decks, and we're going to see a lot of it in the format. Coming in at number 8, Skrels Hive, 1 and a white enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, you lose 1 life and create a 1/1 colorless Phyrexian Might artifact creature token with Toxic 1, and this creature can't block, and also has the corrupted ability as long as an opponent has 3 or more poison counters. Creatures you control with Toxic have lifelink. So again, the corrupted poison counter thing is a huge theme here, and that part to me doesn't matter at all. If you happen to be doing that, then it's an added bonus, but the main part of this card is it's just an enchantment that is spitting out tokens every turn. And as we know from a card like Bitter Blossom or Awakening Zone, one of my personal favorites, those cards are fantastic. Just having an enchantment that sits on the battlefield that is constantly spitting out tokens every turn is fantastic in a whole lot of themes, whether it be a sacrifice theme or a token theme. You just want to be making tokens. Lots and lots of decks that this can fit into. I also think it might be great in an artifact theme because you're spitting out artifact tokens as well, don't forget. So you even look at, like in Akiri, for example, there's a commander that wants you to have lots of artifacts in play, and this is spitting out lots of artifacts, right? That new Urza artifact creature tribal deck, this is an absolute must, I think, because again, you want lots of artifact creatures in play to help cast your commander, and this is an easy way to do that. So any theme where you just want lots of creatures in play, lots of artifacts in play, maybe you want sack fodder, great card that can fit into a lot of decks for sure. Coming in at number 7 in a similar theme, Erabrasks Forge, 2 and a red artifact. At the beginning of combat on your turn, put an oil counter on Erabrasks Forge, then create an X1 red Phyrexian horror creature token with trample and haste, where X is the number of oil counters on Erabrasks Forge. Sacrifice that token at the beginning of the next end step. So again, it's dealing with the oil counters, which, you know, there are other cards in this set that can help this along if you want to. But again, it's just a great card for spitting out tokens if that's what you want to be doing. And again, there's lots of themes that want to be doing stuff like this. There's lots of aggro themes where you just want to create that token, fire it at your opponent. You don't really care if it dies because you're going to sacrifice it at the beginning of your next end step anyway. It has trample and haste, so obviously it can attack right away. And once you get a bunch of oil counters on here, you're really going to be firing some big creatures at your opponents, and they're going to have to deal with this or they're going to be in trouble. Fits in the sacrifice or aristocrats type of theme, because even if you don't attack with it, you can just spit out a token every turn that then you can sacrifice to some effect. It gets sacrificed at the beginning of the next end step, so it works really well there, where you're going to get a dies trigger off of it or a sacrifice trigger, which works with a lot of different cards. So again, just a card that might not look like much, but I think fits in a lot of different archetypes and can slot easily into a lot of decks. Next up, we got Lux Artillery, 4 mana artifact. Whenever you cast an artifact creature spell, it gains Sunburst, which means it enters the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter on it for each color of mana spent to cast it. So they're doing the artifact creature thing here. And of course, for that reason, it's going to be a fantastic include in any of those artifact creature tribal decks, which, man, we've been getting a ton of that lately. Ever since Warhammer 40k and then with Brothers War, we've been getting so much artifact creature tribal stuff. It's weird. It seems to be an archetype that they are pushing here, but I would advise people to ignore that ability. And there might be a lot of people saying, why do I have this so high on my list? It's artifact creature tribal. It's very archetype specific. Let's completely ignore that ability and move on to the other one. At the beginning beginning of your end step. If there are 30 or more counters among artifacts and creatures you control, Lux Artillery deals 10 damage to each opponent. That seems like a pretty fantastic win con in a whole lot of decks. Any deck where you're putting counters on your creatures. This doesn't have to be artifact tribal at all. Any of those +1/+1 counter decks that already exist out there, and again, there's a ton of those, this seems like a great include to help close out the game. It's at the beginning of your end step, so as soon as you play this, if you happen to have 30 or more counters, it's immediately going to deal 10 damage to each of your opponents. And then of course, if the same applies the next turn, it's going to do it again. This is not, I'm sacrificing my Lux Artillery and it deals 10 damage. It's just going to keep doing that over and over and over again, right? It is counters on your artifacts and or creatures. So there's actually a lot of themes here. Like maybe if you are in a charge counter theme, this can be a great fit. I know people will think that 30 counters on your stuff is a lot, but it's actually not that difficult. There's a lot of permanents out there that can very easily pile counters on themselves. I really think this card can slot into a lot of decks if you're in any kind of counter theme at all. How often is it going to be happening that you have those 30 or more counters? I don't know, maybe not a lot, but I think it is very doable in a lot of commander decks. Coming in at number 5, Staff of Completion. 3 mana artifact. Tap, pay 1 life, destroy target permanent you own. Tap, pay 2 life, add 1 mana of any color. Tap, pay 3 life, proliferate, tap, pay 4 life, draw a card, and you can pay 5 mana to untap Staff of Completion. So again, the obvious comparisons here is to Staff of Domination, which has the big list of things that you can do, but of course Staff of Domination is requiring you to pay a whole lot of mana. Usually that card gets used a lot in infinite mana type of scenarios where you can just do all sorts of stuff with it. Here this works as well with the infinite mana scenario because of course you can untap it, but you're going to have to pay the life, which is going to make it a little more difficult to just go infinite with it because you're constantly paying the life. I don't think I want it in that scenario. I think I just want it in pretty much any other scenario, right? So we have to go through the list of abilities here to see how valuable this card can be for you. First of all, tap, pay 1 life to destroy target permanent you own. I think that's a ability that is maybe underrated. It does fit in a lot of themes, I guess, but anytime your opponent steals any of your stuff, you can just destroy it, right? Your opponent steals your commander and you want to get it back, just tap, destroy your own commander so it goes back to the command zone so you can cast it again. So that is a very usable ability. Pay 2 life, add 1 mana of any color. Okay, so now this just becomes a 3 mana rock that adds 1 mana of any color. Of course, that's not fantastic, and paying 2 life for it is even less fantastic, but it's never going to be a dead card, right? This is always going to be a card that's usable in a game because if you need the mana, now you have the option for it. Pay 3 life to proliferate is probably where you're going to mostly want to play this card. In particular, I'm not going to put this in a Atraxa deck because Atraxa is very easy to proliferate already. I probably would put this in a deck, again, maybe the +1/+1 counter theme like in Selesnya, where I don't have a ton of proliferate options. If you want another proliferate option in your deck, this is a fantastic one. Pay 4 life to draw a card is an ability that you're always going to want to use. Now, 4 life to draw a card is kind of a lot, but keep in mind, just a 3 mana artifact that you can tap to draw cards, pretty good, right? As we all know, life is a resource in Commander, and I think a lot of people would prefer to be paying life to draw cards rather than paying mana to draw cards. So maybe you are in a Orzhov life gain deck and life is very much a resource for you because you just got lots of it to spend. This could be a great include as a draw option. And in fact, if you look at a deck like Elenda, for example, I think this is a pretty fantastic fit. You're probably going to be gaining lots of life. Your commander has lifelink, and also the tokens you're making have lifelink. And also the proliferate here works as well, right? Because your commander is putting counters on itself. So now the proliferate can also help you out. So if I'm contemplating this card for a deck, I'm going to look at 2 abilities that I really want to do. And of course, the mana and the draw a card things are always going to be usable. So I probably want to use this in a proliferate scenario, which again, there's tons of decks where there's counters being put on your stuff. So this card actually could probably fit in a ton of decks. Definitely going to be a commander staple, I think. Also, definitely going to be a commander staple coming in at number 4, Clever Concealment, 2 white instant, has Convoke, which of course means you can tap your creatures to help cast this spell and make it cheaper, right? Any number of target non-land permanents you control phase out. That is obviously a fantastic ability in the format. And again, the comparison here probably is to Teferi's Protection. Obviously, Teferi's Protection is better because it pretty much stops you from losing the game in almost every scenario, mostly the life loss thing. Here, you can protect your stuff. It's not going to protect you though. In fact, it might actually leave you more open to attack if you phase out all your creatures. Now, obviously, they can't block because they're not going to reappear until your next turn. So it can be a little bit of a downside there. But again, I just really love being able to protect my stuff. This is only going to hit non-land permanents. So I suppose if you got a buddy who likes playing Armageddon, it's not going to be helpful there, but protects your creatures, protects your artifacts, protects your enchantments, all that good stuff. The Convoke ability can actually make it so that it's free, which is extra good here. I think, if I got 4 creatures in play and at least 2 of them are white, I can tap them all down to cast this for free, right? Convoke is a really powerful ability that allows you to cast that spell for free if you have the appropriate creatures in play. So if I'm in any go wide strategy in white, I'm probably going to try to find room for this card. Definitely going to be a commander staple going forward, no doubt about it. Coming in at number 3, Conduit of Worlds, 2 green artifact. And I've realized I have a lot of artifacts and enchantments on this list. In fact, most of the cards on this list are either artifacts and enchantments. Not sure if that exactly means something, but nevertheless, you may play land cards from your graveyard. Of course, that is a phrase that a lot of people want to be seeing on new cards. Already, again, we have a card that is very easily going to slot into all those decks that are already doing that are probably looking for another option. This is another option, although it's green, so of course it can only go in the green decks. Has another very interesting ability here though. Tap, choose target non-land permanent card in your graveyard. If you haven't cast a spell this turn, you may cast that card. If you do, you can't cast additional spells this turn, activate only as a sorcery. I really like that ability, especially later in the game. If you have a really important thing in your graveyard that you really need, right? Whether it be a combo piece or you can even, again, use a removal spell here. Let's look at that Cankerbloom again. There is a permanent that is going to be in your graveyard because you sacrificed it earlier in the game. Your opponent has a really powerful artifact or enchantment in play. You got to get rid of it. You don't have a removal spell in your hand. Now you choose that non-land permanent in your graveyard and now you can cast it. Can't cast anything else in the turn. Doesn't matter. What really matters is now you can get that thing off the table that really needs to be removed. Maybe even just your commander died, right? If your commander dies and you got Conduit of Worlds in play, maybe you just let it go to the graveyard and then on your turn, now you can activate this and cast your commander from the graveyard rather than having to do it from the command zone where you'll be having to pay that additional commander tax, right? So even just the activated ability here is one that I think you could put in any deck because it's just nice value to have, being able to cast stuff from your graveyard. And then on top of that, playing lands from your graveyard. Again, even though this fits that theme that is playing stuff from graveyards all the time, almost every single deck is going to have fetch lands or maybe evolving wilds type of cards that you can also use from your graveyard. So this really is a card, even though it seems archetype specific, that I think you could probably put in any deck and it's going to be useful for you. Coming in at number 2, again, a card that might seem archetype specific, and it is. Again, there's just a lot of archetype specific cards in this set, so it was really hard for me to avoid those. But this one is really interesting. All will be one, and of course it's the namesake of the set, so we know it's going to be a powerful effect. 3 red enchantment. Whenever you put 1 or more counters on a permanent or player, all will be one deals that much damage to target opponent. Creature an opponent controls or planeswalker an opponent controls. Very interesting wording they have there. I'm not sure why they didn't just say deals damage to any target. I guess you can't hit yourself with it. I'm not sure why you would want to do that. I guess there is scenarios where it is useful, but essentially you can hit an opponent or a creature an opponent controls or a planeswalker an opponent controls, which is almost always the stuff you want to be hitting in a commander game, obviously. And again, a sort of archetype specific card, but you probably would be surprised how many decks that this fits in once you start looking into it. And it is such an incredibly powerful effect, just being able to throw that damage around in a passive manner, right? I'm already doing this anyway in my deck, so this is just giving me free value off of what I'm doing, right? But how many decks is this actually going to fit in? Just to give you an idea, I'm only going to look at the mono red commanders to see the ones that this card I think fits in. Let's start with the Ready Scrap Savant. That's right, a Planeswalker. This is a permanent that you will be putting counters on, and whenever you +2 your commander, you're going to be throwing 2 damage around because that's how many counters you just put on a permanent. So I think it's an interesting fit there. How about Laelia the Blood Reforged? There's a mono red commander that is putting counters on itself. How about Ashling the Pilgrim, a mono red commander that is putting counters on itself? Again, we're not in a counter theme here at all. We just have a mono red commander that is putting counters on itself all the time. Why not get the added bonus, right? Krenko, Tin Street Captain. This guy's going to be putting more and more and more counters on himself as he gets bigger and bigger, and people might not think to throw a card like this in your Krenko deck, but I think it's a great fit. Just throwing that damage around because you're adding value to what you're already doing in your deck. Even though this card looks like it's very archetype specific, I think there's an actual ton of commanders in the format that this card could very easily slot into. But getting to number 1, I had to pick a card that was, I think, going to go in the most decks probably, and I didn't want to pick something that was too archetype specific, although again, this set is so archetype specific that it's tough to find just generically good cards that I think are going to go in every deck. Argentum Masticore, I think, might fit that. Maybe. I really like this card, so maybe I'm being subjective here. Is this the best card from Phyrexia All Will Be One for Commander? I don't think it is necessarily. Is it going to go in the most decks though? Maybe. I think it's a really fantastic card and also a super interesting design, so that's why I put it at number 1. 5 mana artifact creature Phyrexian Masticore, 5/5. First strike protection from multicolored. I like the protection from multicolored. That's pretty sweet. And for those who don't know, we have Masticores already in the game, and they always have a discard a card. That's sort of their thing. They usually have a plethora of abilities, and you have to discard a card when they enter the battlefield or on your upkeep. So of course, that's what we're going to see here as well. At the beginning of your upkeep, sacrifice Argentum Masticore unless you discard a card. That's what we expected from this card, obviously. When you discard a card this way, destroy target non-land permanent an opponent controls with the mana value less than or equal to the mana value of the discarded card. What a fantastic ability. And I put this guy at number 1 for a couple of reasons. The big one being, of course, I love removal. Removal wins games, as I say all the time. And being able to deal with what your opponents are doing is really, really important. Your opponent plays that Rhystic Study, and it's just drawing them a ton of cards. You want to get it off the table, and you don't have a removal option ready, or maybe you're just not playing white or green, which are really the only colors that can deal with enchantments really well. Argentum Masticore is a colorless option for dealing with enchantments, which makes it so much more important in the Commander format. I can just discard a card on my upkeep that has a mana value of 3 or greater and destroy that Rhystic Study. I think this card is super, super valuable in the format for that reason. Again, I'm in like a mono black deck. My opponent plays a Rest in Peace. I'm in a graveyard theme. They've completely locked me out of the game, and I'm having a really hard time getting that Rest in Peace off the table. Now I have a nice option for it. All I have to do is just chuck a 2 mana value card or greater, and I can destroy that non-land permanent. Obviously, if you're in the discard theme, it fits extra good, right? If I'm in that mono black graveyard deck, it's extra good because I probably want to be discarding big creatures into my graveyard. So I'll be doing that with my Argentum Masticore until that problematic thing comes on the table that I need to get rid of, and then I'll do that as well. Or I could just do both, right? I can discard my Razaketh into my graveyard, which I want to do already, and then on top of it, I get to destroy a permanent that's 8 or less, which is pretty much everything, right? I think this easily slots into a ton of decks where you want to be discarding or you want to be chucking stuff in your graveyard, but I also really like it because it is a colorless option for removal, which is really, really important in the format. I love this card. But that is it. That is all. Like I said, overall, I didn't think this was a phenomenal set for Commander. We did get some great ones here for sure. I'm not super excited about this set in general. Like if I'm thinking about cards that I'm actually going to run out and buy, there's only a couple that I actually am probably going to grab for my own decks. Not much at all. And if I look back to like Domineer United and Brothers War, ton of cards that I ended up getting from those sets for my decks is not necessarily a bad thing. I know people are going to tell me in the comments, this is for standard, it's not meant for commander. I get it. That's fine. This is a commander channel. I'm evaluating these sets based on the commander format. And as a commander set, like how does this set impact commander? I don't think it's going to be a very impactful set for the commander format, especially if you look at all the incredibly impactful sets we got last year for commander. I mean, I'm still buying new Capenna cards for my decks because that was such an impactful commander set. I know we don't need it. I'm not saying this is disappointing. I don't really care that this is a not very impactful set for the commander format. Doesn't bother me at all. We already got tons of cards that we can choose from, but I am evaluating this objectively and I just don't think it's a fantastic commander set. And I will further get into this discussion when I get to my best commanders from the set. But let me know what you guys think of this set in the comments below. Are there some fantastic cards here that I maybe skipped over? Like I said, I will be making another video where I talk about some cards that are sort of on the fence for me or are just too archetype specific to be included on this list because they're only going to go in very specific decks. Stay tuned for that. But that is it for today, and thanks for tuning in.